What's up guys, it's GM Max here, and today we are going to learn how to win with the move 1e4. Now some of you may have already seen my video how to play 1e4, but this one is going to show you some more mainline systems. For example, the game we're going to look at between So against Harikrishna from the 2020 Pro Chess League Rapid saw Harikrishna played a French defense with d4, d5. But what if Black decides to play a somewhat different opening? Well, against the Sicilian, if you want something a bit more direct, you can certainly play the Alapin Sicilian with c3. It's a line I found scores incredibly well below the 2000 level, especially below the 1800 level. The reason is that most players are going to try to play their normal Sicilian, but if they play a move like d6, well, you go d4. And the point of c3 becomes apparent, that now after takes, we can take and keep that very strong center, which gives white quite a nice advantage. So knight f3, knight c3, just normal developing moves, just very, very nice for white here. And also if they play a move like knight c6, which is another common move at lower levels, then you can go d4, and once again, after takes, if black doesn't play a move like d5, we can play d5 ourselves and kick that knight away for a very strong initiative. But if they do play d5, we can then take and play knight f3, and one thing you're going to see here is that that queen is very exposed on the d5 square. We're going to kick it away with knight c3 and get a very pleasant advantage in that case. You know, if they play bishop g4, you can always go bishop e2 first if you want to, and then prepare knight c3 in that way. But of course, immediate knight c3 would also certainly be quite reasonable as well. So, in any case, there's also the move e6, which is also seen a lot. But again, d4, and, well, if they go d5, you can either take on d5 and get a more open kind of position, or alternatively, you can play the move e5 and transpose to the advanced French. I mean, for a Sicilian player, like, it's not many Sicilian players that know how to play the French well as black, right? So this is a move that could really annoy your opponents in moving out of their favorite opening. And I should say, for the sake of objectivity, that certainly there are better moves for black. You know, the move d5, and especially the move knight f6 do give black better chance for quality. You know, knight f6 is a move that I would recommend from black's perspective. Kind of playing an Alapin defense where the move c5 does help black to kind of keep that knight on that strong d5 post. Like, you're not worrying about moves like c4 kicking the knight, for example. But in any case, the line that probably not going to face much until you get to like a 2000 plus level in general. So, as for other moves, like after e5, of course I already recommended knight c3 and f4 in a previous video. But if you want something a little bit more, let's say, a little bit different, you can also play knight f3 and play the Scotch 4 knights with knight c3, knight f6 and d4, which I find to be a line that basically is very easy for white to play. You don't really need to know much opening theory to play it successfully. But if black sort of avoids the main line, he often ends up with quite a bad position. You'd be surprised how many players play moves like knight takes d4 at lower levels, just allowing white to develop his queen very actively for free. Or play moves like bishop c5 that also give white a nice initiative with bishop to e3. Instead, black should play bishop b4, and, well, objectively these positions are certainly fine for black, where they can hit back in the center, and they are eliminating our pawn on e4 with the exchange. That being said, it's still very much a very easy and safe position for white, where you can play moves like bishop g5, queen f3. You get very fast mobilization of the pieces, and if black is not careful, you can get some decent attacking chance against the king. I know I had a friend, Blair Mandler, who actually played these systems with white and had a performance like 2,500 in online blitz with this variation, despite only being rated about 2,100. Now, if you want to be a high overperformer as well, do make sure to smash that like button on this video. And of course, there are other lines as well, like, of course, Caro-Kann is another system. But yeah, after d4, d5, a very lazy system you can play is just to go ed5. And just play it like a sort of exchange Queen's Gambit decline with an extra tempo. You know, after knight c6, c3. It's very easy to play moves like bishop f4, knight d2, knight f3 castles. And the general idea in such positions is that if you're able to get that knight to the e5 outpost, then you're generally doing pretty well. And that will give you a very good foundation for a kingside attack when a castle's short. Of course, it's definitely possible to go much, much deeper, but this is a good foundation, I think, for a repertoire that's a little bit more mainline than the lines I recommend in the how to play 1e4, which is more kind of how to play it in a lazy system kind of way. But these lines we're looking at here are sort of how to basically aim for a more open fight and more open positions that probably in the long term are going to improve your game more as a chess player. Speaking of improving your game more as a chess player, do make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated with more videos of mine that will make you a better chess player. So played the move knight to c3, and at this point Harikrishna went for the Rubinstein variation with d4, and I find it below 1800, this is actually probably one of the most common lines, at least when I played online blitz, it's the move that I faced the most often against untitled players. So it's definitely good to know how to play these structures with the open center. If they play to move knight to f6 instead, then one very simple system is just to go e5. And then the move c5 is often kind of an annoying move, so an easy way to deal with it is to play knight c2. So you can meet c5 with c3 and just build this very nice solid pawn chain. And I know that the knight looks very weird on e2 blocking the bishop, but at the same time black also has this knight on d7 that's also blocking his bishop. And we will be able to get our bishop active with moves like knight f4, bishop d3 and castles. This line has only been able to become well known in the last few years, but it has been played by a lot of strong players. And I think it's a system that even though you're not getting an advantage with white, it certainly is a way to set some problems and get your opponent in a position that's very different from the usual French structures that they're likely to, well, enjoy and be familiar with. And still you've got the pawn e5, but normally you don't have like the knight f3, knight e2 set up against the knight on d7. And if they play the winner with bishop to b4, well, there are quite a few safe options. Like the laziest one is just to play e d5, and then to play bishop to d3. You can play knight g2, castles. If they play knight f6, you can also even consider ideas like pinning the knight with bishop g5 and going for knight g3 and trying to sort of put a knight into f5 in the middle game is a plan you often see in these structures. Now, of course, objectively speaking, black is absolutely fine here. That's the reason why you more often see moves like e5 at a high level. But this is a way to certainly sort of avoid a theoretical battle and get a very simple position where white, at least where the plans white are very straightforward. And you can try to fight for a small edge without really risking much. In any case, let's now look at the move d takes e4 that Harikrishna played in the game. After knight takes e4, black played the move knight to d7. And the reason for knight d7 is that you want to prepare to move knight f6 and be able to take back with the knight, which is actually what happened in the game after knight f3, knight gf6. And after knight takes, we see that black at least is able to keep a knight on the very flexible f6 square, where it also does a good job of guarding the king for when you castle short later. Now, black could try and move like an immediate knight f6, but then after takes, either you play gf6 and you get this really ugly pawn structure with the doubled pawns, or if you go queen f6, then there's knight f3, and the problem for black is that if he just develops normally with a move like bishop d6, you'd be amazed how many of my opponents in fast games have fallen for something like castles and bishop g5, just winning the queen by force in this case. So that's a trick that can win you some fast games, but even if they play a move like h6, like obviously h6 you're losing a lot of time to not lose the queen in this way, and you can use that tempo even maybe to castle long and just get a very nice advantage. Of course, castling short should also be fine here. So after knight d7, this is how the game continued, where at this point Wesley So played a very nice move of bishop to e3. So why is it that we're developing the queen's bishop before the king's bishop? The reason is that in these structures, black's dream is to get in the move c5 and trade off our d4 pawn to get rid of our space advantage. If he does that and he also completes his development, he is going to equalize here. So by playing bishop e3, we're just making it much harder to get in c5 by defending that square with the bishop. I mean, if black plays a move like bishop d6 and develops normally, well, one really creative idea is we can actually castle long with queen e2. And in such a position after long castles, we can see again that it's not that easy if black gets c5 due to our bishop. But after bishop e7, rook he1, we're kind of ready to, well, play because we've got all of our pieces very well positioned in the center. Often we'll play a knight to e5, charge those kingside pawns and just hack that black king to bits. It's a pretty straightforward plan. It's kind of the sort of plan that, they used to say in the old days that a club player could beat a grandmaster because you just throw the pawns at the king and mate them as such. Whereas black has to be very precise not to get mated. Well, the game saw knight d5 instead, and this is kind of the old main line where they used to kick the bishop away in order to try to get in c5 and, get the c5 break in. But we're going to see here that the c5 move does come at a price, that black does not get it rent-free. So this is a position where I want to see if you're able to find a way to keep up that initiative with white to play. Alright, so you've had a bit of time to think about it. Obviously you can pause the video for more time to think. But well done if you came up with the move bishop to b5. To be fair, the move knight e5 is also kind of interesting, trying to go bishop b5 without allowing bishop b7, bishop d7. But I think that actually we don't really mind this trade of the bishops because it's true on a purely strategic level that black is quite happy to trade off his bad bishop. Often the bishop is very bad on c8 in the French because of the e6 pawn blocking its way. And it's true that black is getting a lead in development. Well, not lead development, he's getting extra developing move with queen d7. But now the move c4 comes. We see that white's getting a little bit of an initiative here. In fact, I think in this position that Harikrishna probably should have played the move knight to b6. The reason for this is so that you're able to hit that c4 pawn. But then after rook c1, I find that this is still quite a promising position for white. Because if you play c takes d4, which is kind of the obvious move to grab a pawn, well, now we see that rook c1 doesn't just defend the pawn, but it also supports c5, kicking that knight away, so if they play knight d5, well, now we don't take on d4, we look for a better move, and it turns out that knight e5 is just incredibly strong, because if the queen vacates this diagonal, queen a4 is going to be a very nasty check, keeping that black king in the open center, which is a very big health risk. You would have to take out very expensive insurance if he would even get it. But okay, these jokes aside, after queen b5, well, then the move queen f3 is just incredibly strong. Black really doesn't have a sensible way to defend this pawn on f7. Knight f6 leaves you too far behind in development, but if you play f6 instead, then there's queen h5, and the tactics just all work for white. After g6, knight takes g6, we're using the pin on the h-file to our advantage, and after takes, well, white is an exchange up, and black's counterplay is not really sufficient, so white should be able to win this with best play. Well, instead the game saw the move knight f6, and this is where we kind of just get to enjoy a nice crush by Wesley So, with So after all being one of the very best players in the world. So he played the move knight e5, not the first time we've seen this idea of hitting the queen, because a move like queen d4 is just asking for trouble with queen to a4, knight d7, and you're going to see after bishop c3 that, we've got the rook d1 coming up, and it's just really, really bad news for black in this case. Instead, he played the move queen c7, trying to defend that way, but then queen knight a4 followed anyway. Of course, you don't really want to have your king stuck in the center, especially when you're not even getting any material for it in return. So Harikrishna played knight d7, but these kind of pins reminded me a bit of the opera game by Paul Morphy against the Duke and the Count, with that powerful pin just tying the opponent up. And so Wesley So kept up the pressure with a very nice move, bishop a5. Well done if you saw that move from afar. The point of this is that if black does play a move like b6, at first you might think, okay, we just kick the bishop back and there's nothing. But as always, it's good to look at all the checks and captures, especially when there's some kind of tactic. And it turns out bishop b6 is a very beautiful move. You can't take with the knight because the king is pinned. The knight is pinned to the king. You can't take with the queen because then queen d7 is going to be checkmate. And if you play a takes b6, then there's queen a8 and white just wins the exchange and a pawn for the win. So for that reason, black played queen c8, white castled long, just bring that rook in the attack. And it's just kind of fun to be able to castle long and kind of not just castle, but also have your rook come in the attack at the same time. It certainly works here. And after f6, So just crashed through in a very convincing fashion. He didn't move the knight on e5, which is probably the move that the average Joe would play. But instead he played the move d5, realizing that actually the threat to knight is not as serious as white's threats to the black king and pieces. Because if you take that knight, again, obviously knight e5 is not a legal move due to the pin. But after fe5 and d6, this capture on d7 is going to very quickly end black's resistance. So after king e7, and if you have to play a move like king e7, it tells you how hopeless the position is for Harikrishna. And So finished off the game very handily with knight d7, queen to d7. I mean, you could keep the queens on. In principle, I have such a weak king, it does make some sense to play a move like queen b3 and preserve the queens. However, the move queen d7 that was played in the game also turns out to be completely winning, because even though at least the king is not getting mated with the queens off the board, white's able to get a big lead in development with rook h1. I mean, look at black's remaining pieces, they're all ready to be set up for the next game. And if king df7, then rook d7 is coming with tempo, hitting the king and the pawn on b7. So black played king f5 and decided to try to play it like it's king of the hill chess. We had rook to d5, king g6. And now we see with f4 that Wesley So is not giving black a moment's respite. He's ready to go f5 to kick that king away and just take away a lot of good squares from black's pieces. The game continued b6, f5. And now if you bring the king back to f7, then there's rook to d7. I mean, if you look at black's pieces, black still doesn't have a sensible way to develop. This bishop doesn't have a safe square at the moment. The rook on a8 is stuck defending the pawn on a7. And the rook on h8, well, like I said, it's set up for the next game. So Harikrishna tried king h5, but after bishop d2, it's just all bad news. The game ended g6. Rook e3 was played, just bringing the final piece in the attack. Even in the endgame, it's still good to bring that final piece in the attack. It's one of the Grandmaster secrets. And now after gf5, one thing I've noticed is that a lot of relatively inexperienced players in such positions, they're going to just give check, check, check everywhere. And in the time, the king is going to kind of run back to safety. Whereas what top players do is they will try to build more of a mating net around the opponent's king, just kind of weaving it so that, okay, just playing a deadly quiet move, not allowing that king to escape. So that's sort of my hint for you to see if you can find the move that white played in the game. Alright, so hopefully you guys were able to find the winner. Actually, there's more than one winning move, but the one that So played is the best one. He played rook to g3, making sure that king is not able to run to the relative safety of the center. It kind of sounds weird saying, because normally king's safer on the flank than on the center, but this one's an exception. So after the move king to h4, white played rook takes f5, and you can already see that black's days are numbered. The game ended bishop d6. It's okay, at least black managed to connect the rooks, but it's all a bit too late. After the move rook h3, okay, technically rook g7 was a faster mate, but this is good enough as well. After king g4 and rook fh5, the only way in which black can avoid this rook 3 to h4 mate is to give up the bishop, but we all know that Wesley So could win a piece up with his eyes closed, and therefore Harikrishna resigned here. So there you are, you can now see how to win with e4. We've got to learn some very interesting weapons, such as the Alapin Sicilian after c5 with c3. We also saw the power of the 4-knight Scotch with knight f3, knight c3, and just playing d4, so a very direct central approach for white. And then against the French, which was the main thing we looked at, well, we saw how after knight c3, the white does have good chances to get a small pull, where he is able to just get a space advantage a lot of different lines, or even in certain cases just play ed5 after bishop b4 and just get a very simple position with easy piece play. In any case, well, do make sure to like this video if you enjoyed it, to comment below of what new things you learned from the video, and to subscribe to get more of my win with chess opening videos. So, I'm going to see you guys in the next chess video, and good luck with playing 1e4.